The subcommittee will come to order, and good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for being here. It's great to see so many friends and familiar faces who are champions in the fight in combating human trafficking. Our hearing today will focus on the preparations for the upcoming Super Bowl to prevent human trafficking and strategies employed by airlines, buses, and trains, as well as hotels, designed to mitigate human trafficking. In less than a week, New Jersey will be hosting the Super Bowl, and along with welcoming enthusiastic fans, the state also is preparing for the likely influx of both domestic and international traffickers. As a matter of fact, many of them are already there. Sadly, but almost certainly, they are bringing with them sexually exploited trafficking victims, many of them from abroad, in an attempt to cash in on the Super Bowl crowds. We know from the past, any sports venue, and especially the Super Bowl, acts as a sex trafficking magnet. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, for example, reports that more than 10,000 exploited women and girls were trafficked to Miami for the Super Bowl in 2010. This must not happen again. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has put in place a robust anti-human trafficking plan. For example, his Department of Homeland Security and Preparedness has stepped up efforts to combat trafficking at the Super Bowl, distributing flyers to emergency medical services, fire department, law enforcement, and other emergency care professions so that these frontline professionals will know when to be concerned that someone is a trafficking victim and how to respond appropriately. The transportation and hospitality training concept has proven straightforward, effective, and thankfully it is catching on. On our way to yet another Assembly and Community Awareness Conference, this time at St. Elizabeth's College in Morristown, New Jersey Assistant Attorney General Tracy Thompson, who is spearheading the Christie administration's anti-human trafficking effort, told me earlier today that they have trained 10,000 people, including the Train the Trainer initiative. She noted that the Super Bowl creates an increased, quote, breeding ground for sex trafficking. She also said today's victims can be any race, age, or gender. Victims are exploited for prostitution, pornography, and forced labor. She went on to say traffickers control victims through force and fraud, utilizing physical and psychological abuse, threats, and isolation. Know it, see it, report it, she continued. According to Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott, the Super Bowl can be described as he puts it, and I quote him, the single largest human trafficking incident in the United States. Captain Doug Kane, Louisiana State Police spokesman, said after the 2013 Super Bowl in New Orleans, quote, anytime you have a large influx of tourists in town and they're spending a lot of money, there's a criminal element that moves in to take advantage of that, close quote. Greece, which hosted the Olympics in 2004, saw a 95% increase in trafficking victims in the months leading up to and including the Olympics. Next month, Russia, a country ranked as at the lowest tier, what we call Tier 3, by the annual U.S. Department of State's Trafficking in Persons report, as we all know, will host the Olympic Games. Since Russia does not have in place any formal national procedures to guide law enforcement in the identification of sex trafficking victims and does not fund trafficking victim care, I and so many others are very concerned that the 2014 Winter Olympics may turn out to be a trafficking nightmare. Later this year, Brazil will host the 2004 World Cup and then the 2016 Summer Olympics. Although Brazil has improved their anti-trafficking laws, and I've actually been there, I've met with lawmakers in Brasilia, and is taking steps to mitigate trafficking risks, the fact remains that Brazil will have to do much more if they want to protect their children from sex tourism. Numbers from Brazil's federal police indicate that between 250,000 to 400,000 children are forcibly prostituted. Worldwide, the best estimates are that 600,000 to 800,000 trafficking victims are moved across international borders every year. Millions more victims are moved within national borders, but anti-trafficking efforts have only recently turned to equipping transportation employees to identify victims in transit. The training is easy, it's inexpensive, and it's already saving lives. In July of 2010, I chaired a conference here in Washington to bring together relevant U.S. agencies such as Customs and Border Patrol, various U.S. airlines and non-governmental organizations to focus on interdicting traffickers by training commercial transportation employees to recognize the indicators for trafficking. Speakers included Deborah Sigmund, who is here with us today, founder of an NGO called Innocence at Risk, explained how flight attendants were the first line of defense in the fight against human trafficking. As a matter of fact, I took her pamphlet and handed out hundreds of copies of that pamphlet to other parliamentarians at the next Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Flight attendants are in a unique position to observe potential trafficking in progress and then call a trafficking hotline to inform the pilot or radio ahead so that proper authorities can intervene. Former flight attendant Nancy Rivard, president of Airline Ambassadors International, one of today's witnesses, told us how she and other flight attendants compared notes one day and were shocked and dismayed at how often they had noticed what they suspected was trafficking or a trafficked woman or child on their flight, but had no training or protocol to do something about it. Nancy has been doing a great deal about it ever since, training airline employees around the United States and around the world. Last year, I was privileged to join Ms. Rivard at a training seminar in Kiev, Ukraine. One of the earliest successes of the program was a call Ms. Rivard placed to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security regarding a child she had observed on her flight from the Dominican Republic to Boston. That tip led to the breakup of a trafficking ring that had transported more than 80 children to the United States. Just this year, last year, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security released a similar training initiative called the Blue Lightning Program, to domestic U.S. airlines. And so far, Delta, JetBlue, Allegiant, and North American Airlines are on board. With minimal modifications, the training is also easily adaptable to bus drivers and station operators, train conductors, trucking associations, and other transportation industry professionals. At one time or another, every trafficking victim will be moved. We need to interdict that movement, rescue the trafficking victim, and put behind bars the person involved with the slave trade. The New Jersey Human Trafficking Task Force, which was originally started with seed money from a law that I authored, known as the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and subsequent reauthorizations, is working overtime to mitigate sex trafficking and has released, like the governor's office, anti-trafficking brochures to bus and train employees in New Jersey, as well as reached out to other major industry on the front lines of spotting traffickers and victims, including hotels. We've included at the press table some of that material, which I encourage you to take a look at. We have with us today the NGO, Child Prostitution and Trafficking, or ECPAT USA, which has been conducting hotel training on behalf of the task force in the lead-up to the Super Bowl. Hyatt, Hilton, Wyndham, Carlson, and Accor hotels have been establishing a new industry standard to ensure that their properties are not used for human trafficking. In addition to reaching out to transportation employees and hotels, the New Jersey Human Trafficking Task Force has increased print and electronic public service announcements and training programs for law enforcement, healthcare workers, lawyers, and others on the front line. In December, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the OSCE, not many people perhaps have heard of it, but it's kind of like the human rights counterpart to NATO in Europe, and it's comprised of 57 countries from Europe and North America, endorsed my plan to make anti-trafficking training for airline employees, other public and commercial carriers, as well as hotel employees, a primary goal in the international strategy to combat human trafficking. I want to especially thank the Ukrainian chair in office and the Ukrainian government who took the lead, working side by side with the United States and other interested countries, to make sure that that language was included in the action plan. So thank you, Ukraine. In Istanbul, Turkey, at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly last July, members of parliaments, well over 250, maybe as many as 300, adopted my resolution to implement such a training in each and every country of the 57 nations. Any country that competes to host the next major sporting event must be fully aware of the human trafficking vulnerabilities associated with such events and the best practices for protecting and rescuing victims. In fact, the International Olympic Committee and the Fédération Internationale de Football, or FIFA, should take into consideration a country's anti-trafficking commitment and ability when awarding those games. We will soon be writing a letter to all of these associations asking them to make that part of the criteria. Standard anti-trafficking measures should be included along with the required security measures. Finally, the only standard that fits the crime of human trafficking is zero tolerance, and it must be vigorously and faithfully enforced by arrests of those engaged in this nefarious trade, modern-day slavery. And there could be no higher priority than the liberation and protection of the victims. We've had many victims come to this committee and give their testimony. Through their tears and through their agony, they have asked us, practically begged us, to do more. We have to respond more aggressively. Combating human trafficking must be continuously prioritized at all levels of government, the faith community, civil society, and corporations, including the National Football League, the NFL. All of us must do our part to protect women and girls.